Consent is a key factor that separates voluntary sexual activity from sexual assault. Research with college-aged men who admit to activity that meets the legal threshold for sexual assault but were never convicted often say that sexual activity occurred but assert that it was consensual. And in allegations of sexual assault, police officers need to make an evaluation as to whether the event was consensual or not prior to recommending a charge. And during this exercise, they will develop explanations of the events to help them make sense of the case facts. And from this, certain elements may trigger a sexual assault or a rape script. So scripts are cognitively organized frameworks that encompass expectations about the behaviors and characteristics of complainants and perpetrators, as well as expectations regarding the sequence and nature of sexual assault versus consensual sex. The organization and content of these scripts provide insight into police officers' evaluation of sexual assault allegations and their subsequent decision-making in regards to charge. To counter any script-related misconceptions that can interfere with an investigation, we therefore need to identify what scripts are important and where they are important. So traditional notions of chastity and respectability have influenced typical complainant status. So typical complainant does nothing to precipitate the offence, such as inviting the offender into her house for coffee. A typical complainant does not dress provocatively, become intoxicated, they physically resist their attacker, and they report the assault straight away. Research with police officers has found that complainants' intoxication at the time of the alleged offence and not cooperating with the police may be markers of a false report. And this is really an issue in justice outcomes for complainants who are evaluated as police to be atypical, particularly because it means that other case evidence may not be considered to the same extent as it would be for so-called typical or real complainants. Offence type is also important in evaluations of sexual assault. And while sexual assault by a stranger is considered to be the archetypal form of rape, sexual assault by acquaintances is the more common type of rape. And research with police officers has similarly found that when an alleged assault occurs in the complainant's or the accused's house, that may also be considered to be a marker of a false report. Police officers have also reported that acquaintance rapes are more difficult to prosecute and there is a low chance of conviction. And the problem with this is that these two attitudes relating to police officers' views about where real rape happens and the perception that the criminal justice process cannot adequately deal with these cases is very problematic for complainants who are sexually assaulted by an acquaintance. So the final construct I will introduce is rape myth acceptance. And rape myths are rigid, prejudicial, but widely held false beliefs about complainants, perpetrators, and sexual assault. Some examples are no healthy adult female who resists vigorously can be raped by an unarmed man, and any woman who is a tease or leads a man on is just asking to be raped. And those items are from the 1985 Costin's Rape Myth Acceptance Scale, which was used in our current study. And whilst rape myths don't strictly form part of a rape or consensual sex script, they do act to uphold stereotypes about so-called real complainants and real rape. And prior research has found that participants who endorse rape myths more highly will also attribute a greater level of responsibility to the complainant. And in Jordan's study with police officers in Australia and New Zealand, she argued that erroneous stereotypes regarding rape that facilitate rape myths may mean that some complainants are met with disbelief at a critical juncture in the criminal justice process. So prosecutorial decisions that are influenced by rape myths may therefore be contributing to the attrition of these cases. So the research questions I will be discussing today are: 1, the extent to which scripts about complainant stereotypes and offence prototypes drive police officers' evaluations of consent, and 2, the role of rape myth acceptance in police officers' decisions in sexual assault cases. So to address the first research question, we utilise a 2x2 between subjects design that vary complainant typicality. Typical complainant physically resisted the accused and cooperated with the police, whilst an atypical complainant did not physically resist the accused and was uncooperative with the investigation. And offence typicality varied by acquaintance versus stranger sexual assault. In the acquaintance version, the complainant and accused met at a party where the assault happened at the accused's house. In the stranger version, the complainant was sexually assaulted on the street whilst leaving the party. And the dependent variable we wanted to measure was the consensual typicality of the sexual contact between the complainant and the accused. So basically, how much do police officers say that the alleged offence was typical of consensual sex? So participants were asked to indicate agreement on a scale of 1 to 7, so not at all likely to very likely, to questions such as how similar are the events portrayed in this case a typical act of consensual sex. And we developed a composite scale from those items, which, as you can see, had a very high level of reliability. Police officers and recruits from Tasmania and New South Wales were invited to participate in the study via a web link, and they read one of 4 experimental conditions and viewed crime scene photographic evidence. In the acquaintance condition, participants viewed pictures of the couch where the alleged assault took place, whilst in the stranger condition, they viewed a picture of the street where the alleged assault took place. So there were 110 participants in total. Around 80% were from New South Wales, whilst around 20% were from Tasmania. The gender split was about 2/3 male to 1/3 female, and ages range from 20 to 58 years old. About 40% said that they had received specialised training to investigate sexual assault, whilst half were untrained, and around 11% did not disclose this information. There was quite a high rate of variability between how many number of cases had been investigated. So about 40% said they had investigated none to 5 cases, whilst around 60% had investigated 6 or more cases. And for these participants, some of them stated that they had investigated hundreds of cases. But I must point out that the relationship between training and number of cases investigated is not a linear sequence. And as we can see, for those who investigated 6 or more cases, only around 20% of them had received specialised training. And to give you an example of the level of experience and the high caseload of sexual assault cases, when asked how many cases had been investigated, one detective in New South Wales stated, "Every day for the past 5 years, I have up to 20 cases at a time," whilst another detective stated, "It feels that is all I do, at least 200, I couldn't place a number on it." So a 2x2 between groups ANOVA was conducted to compare the effect of complainant typicality and offence type on police officers' evaluation that the alleged event was typical of consensual sex. And we found a significant main effect for complainant typicality and a significant main effect for offence type, but no interaction effects. And I'll just explain that a bit further with this graph. So as we can see, the alleged assault was considered to be more likely to be consensual sex when the complainant was presented as atypical compared to typical, and when the complainants and accused were acquaintances as opposed to when they were strangers. And what this is telling us is that police officers are relying on different scripts when they're making evaluations about sexual assault, and that these cues to consent have independent elements. So complainants who do not resist the accused and do not cooperate with police may be at risk of not having their complaint taken seriously, no matter how the offence occurred. And conversely, complainants who are raped by an acquaintance also may not have their complaint taken as seriously, regardless of how they behave during the event and their cooperation with the police. So how the complainant behaves and their relationship to the perpetrator are still 2 elements that are clouding the judgments of even highly trained and highly experienced criminal justice professionals. Ultimately, however, despite what police officers think, we need to ensure they're doing their jobs effectively, which brings me to the second research question I'd like to talk about, which, to remind you, was the role of rape myth acceptance on police officers' decision-making. So in preliminary analysis, we conducted Spearman's row correlation to look at factors that were related to how likely the participants were to recommend the accused was charged with sexual assault. And as you can see, participants who were more likely to recommend a charge were also more likely to report that the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution would prosecute the case, and they were also more likely to say that the accused would be found guilty. However, those who were less likely to recommend a charge also endorsed a higher level of rape myth acceptance. And we can interpret this table in two different ways. So we could say that police officers are making pragmatic decisions about what they think is realistic in the prosecution of sexual assault, but it could also be that they're rationalising their own negative beliefs about sexual assault by saying that other criminal justice professionals would also not prosecute this case. So given that finding, a hierarchical multiple regression was conducted to identify factors that predicted police officers' recommendation that the accused be charged with sexual assault. Age and gender were included as covariates in the first block of analysis, whilst likelihood that the ODPP would prosecute the case, likelihood that the accused would be found guilty, and rate myth acceptance were included in the second block of the analysis. What we found was that only rate myth acceptance significantly predicted police officers recommended that the accused would be charged, such that low endorsement of rate myths was associated with a high likelihood of charge. And what's really interesting about this finding is that when we asked the same sample about what factors affected culpability decisions, they said things like, I do not feel that it is likely that the accused would ever be convicted of this offence, no matter whether I believe the victim or not. Whilst another said, this type of sexual assault matter will ultimately come down to the issue of consent, will never be a guilty verdict from a jury as there is too much doubt raised by the defence. So it is clear that police officers think that they're considering how the process will go through the criminal justice system. However, as we can see, rate myth acceptance does have a key role in making these decisions. So what we can say from this is that there's a gap between what police officers say affects their decision making and what is actually affecting their decision making. And this is quite consistent with other research with criminal justice groups. So Page's 2010 study, she found that whilst a small proportion of police officers endorse rate myths, law reforms to support complainants will not be effective until there is an attitude shift of all key participants in the criminal justice procedure. Spahn and colleagues similarly looked at sexual battery cases in Miami, Florida, and they found that attorneys also assess cases based on the likelihood of conviction as well as stereotypes regarding rape complainants. And they argued that those who guard the gateway to justice make decisions to process sexual assault cases possibly based on false beliefs. And just to give an indication of how broad the impact of rate myth acceptance may be, I'd like to work through the following table with you a bit. So this table is from our current police officer sample, and what we found was that those who endorsed a higher level of rate myth acceptance were also less likely to perceive that the accused was guilty of committing sexual assault. They thought that the jury would find the complainant less credible. There was a less likelihood they would consider the strength of the corroborating evidence in recommending a charge, and less likelihood that the allegation met the legal threshold for sexual assault. They engaged in high level of victim blaming and blamed the perpetrator less. They also thought that the alleged offence was more typical of consensual sex, that the complainant wanted sex, and that the complainant led the accused on. So as we can see, rate myth acceptance actually has the potential to shape the entire interpretation of an investigation. There was some positive news. So we looked at the relationship between experience and rate myth acceptance, and what we found was that as the number of cases investigated increased, rate myth acceptance decreased. There was, however, no relationship between specialised training and rate myth acceptance, which tells us that the longer police are in contact with complainants in the field, rate myth acceptance may decrease over time. However, that is really not an ideal place for police officers to decrease rate myth acceptance, particularly as they can be the first point of contact for complainants in the process of sexual assault. And ineffectiveness of training on reducing rape myths is very consistent with prior research in police samples. And whilst this doesn't discount the need for training, it tells us that we need innovative, ongoing training for both recruits and individuals in the field. And one way that we could do this is, a possible way, is to shift attention from complainant characteristics and how the complainant behaves and whether she knew the accused, to factors related to the perpetrator and the larger context of sexual assault. Training should also encompass that rape myths decontextualize rape, and they may subtly be impacting the decision making, which can lead to the attrition of these cases and the miscarriage of justice through the further perpetration of sexual violence. That's it.